Support comes from St. Louis Public Library Foundation, helping the library serve children and their families with programs and services needed to become lifelong readers. More information about the foundation is at slpl.org.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. There was a time before cell phones. It's true, I was there. And in many ways, that time wasn't wholly different from now. Before smartphones, we had television, telephones, and celebrity influencers in media. Toxic politics and constant advertising, we had plenty of that too. But it was easier then to get away from those things. They weren't all crammed into a single device that can show you all of them constantly, competing with and often beating out the real world around us. And that real world includes school. Kids and teens have had smartphones and taken them to school for many years now. But parents, teachers, and even students have reached a point where they're saying something is wrong about the way cell phones are being used in classrooms. School districts across the St. Louis region are setting their own policies. There's also been a call to address cell phone use in school coming from the highest political offices, including in Illinois.
Improving the classroom environment and limiting distractions is vital to student achievement. And in conversations with educators and parents around this state, there is one thing that they commonly cite as an impediment to learning in the classroom: cell phones. Furthermore, cyberbullying has expanded at alarming rates, and it's time for Illinois to take measures to protect our kids. That's why this session, I'll move forward with legislation requiring all school districts in Illinois to adopt a cell phone policy that bans the use of phones during classroom instruction.
And that was Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker during his State of the State address in early February. Pritzker said the policy would bring more focus on learning, a point echoed by Missouri Governor Mike Kehoe. Kehoe has thrown his support behind a state bill to ban cell phone use in schools. In a post to X, Kehoe said, "It's simple. Cell phones have no place in Missouri classrooms." Bills in the Missouri and Illinois legislatures, if passed and signed into law, would set the stage for something new: schools having to set policies about when, where, and how cell phones can be used by students. Currently, there's no agreed-upon system for how those policies should work and where the lines should be drawn. Some school districts have already passed their own policies. That includes the Edwardsville School District, which is a big player in the Metro East with more than 7,000 students. To discuss how this issue has played out, I'm joined by Superintendent Patrick Shelton. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And also here are two of the district's high school students. Josie Proctor is a junior at Edwardsville High School. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
And we also have Amulya Girada, also Edwardsville High School, and a senior there. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And both Josie and Amulya are student representatives on the Board of Education. So this year, the Edwardsville School District debuted a new cell phone policy, and one news report called it a quote, crackdown. Now, the policy affects the high school and Liberty and Lincoln middle schools, and it's very simple. Students can't use their cell phones during instructional time in the classroom, and if they break the policy, their phone is taken for a day, and there are escalating consequences. On the fourth violation, the student would have to check their phone in at the office and then pick it up at the end of the day. So, Patrick, when I had mentioned the word crackdown, you and students, Josie and Amulya, kind of laughed a little bit about that. Does that reflect something about how the discussion to have a policy got started in your district?
It definitely reflects the the culture around cell phones in schools before this year. And I think if I think back to prior to the school year, standing at the front door welcoming students at the high school, it was really common for students to have phones in their hands, AirPods in their ears, even walking through the hallway, sometimes in classrooms. And so they were definitely showing up as a distraction to just everyday interaction, not just instruction.
So Amulya and Josie, you are our high school students. I mean, is what your superintendent is describing, is that what you also were seeing around you walking into school the first day,
Yeah.
Josie?
I think phones definitely limit the amount of actual human conversations that you have. It's a lot more just listening to stuff in your ears and not really talking to other people.
Amulya, were you one of those students?
I would say I was not one of those students. I definitely like to listen to my music in class, but never when a teacher was talking. But I do know of kids who would have their AirPods in and their hair or their caps covering their ears to not have the teacher see.
Patrick, as far as what you were seeing and what teachers were seeing, what other sorts of situations were making it a pressing issue, something that you needed to take up?
Yeah, we definitely had a problem with cell phones being used with discipline issues, whether it was trying to connect with another student and meet up for different reasons. Some of those physical altercations, some of those not as aggressive, but definitely they were being used for behind the scenes conversations in our schools. And then above and beyond that, we are like every high school. We have every once in a while we have a fight or a physical altercation, and cell phones are being pulled out to video as opposed to stop the altercation, which was just exacerbating the problem, right? And especially with social media. So there were lots of other impacts that were being seen across the school.
Yeah. I'd like to invite you to this conversation. Is your school banning cell phones? How does that impact you as a student or as a parent? And if you're a teacher, how have cell phones changed your classroom? If you have a question or comment about this topic, please give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. Let's kind of pull back a little bit and talk about how smartphones have become part of your lives. Josie, how is it that you were introduced to, the smartphone world?
When I was little, I got my first iPod, and I got Musical.ly on it, but that was really it. That was all the social media I had. And then I never got my first iPhone until about 6th grade, whenever we started having extracurriculars and stuff that I had to communicate after school if I needed picked up. And then I started to get social media around 8th grade, but my parents were a little different. I had to sign a contract for social media.
Okay.
And, it was very monitored, but yeah, I got my first phone in 6th grade.
Yeah. How much does that reflect, Amulya, what your experience has been?
That's very similar to me. In 6th grade, when extracurriculars started, I would have to communicate with my parents, but before that, it was more an iPod. I got my first social medias going into high school. I didn't have a contract just because I joked that I was the experimental child, so.
Oh, okay. So you have younger siblings?
Yeah.
Okay.
My brother had a contract. He still does.
Okay.
But I was more free.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you all are talking about middle school, because that does seem like the point at which smartphones and cell phones are being given to students. Is that why, with the district superintendent, that it's a policy that is about those specific levels, middle school and high school?
Well, it's interesting. We were talking about this before we went on the air, and we're seeing cell phones as early as 3rd and 4th grade now. As just a general rule, we certainly have younger kids, and it's kind of gone without saying that in those schools you don't have your cell phone out, you keep it off, things like that. But it definitely has become more of a problem as we get into 6th grade and on up.
Now, I opened this discussion up talking a little bit about the world before cell phones. And so I surmise that you also remember the time that I described. So at what point was it in your own life, Patrick, that you started seeing cell phones really make an impact at the classroom level?
Oh, gosh. it's probably been at least 10 years ago that it was started to become an everyday distraction, maybe even a little bit further depending on the community. And, we didn't always have as many cell phone towers. And so there's always been communities that aren't as connected, I think, as others. But it's been at least a decade.
And what is it that you have heard from teachers? Teachers who remember the time before cell phones, and then ones who also are young enough to have had them as students themselves.
So from our more veteran teachers, we started hearing really loudly last year, but even before last year, that they were competing with cell phones for a student's attention, that it was constantly a fight between getting a student to put away their cell phone or pay attention to instruction. And I think that's across the board. I don't think that depends on the age of the teacher, but I do think teachers who have grown up with cell phones probably are more likely to integrate them into classroom. And we heard that also, that there's a common theme of take out your cell phone and look up this, or take out your cell phone and use it in that way. And that became part of the conversation about limiting cell phone usage in our high school, because we do want to teach our students to be good digital citizens. We don't want to limit access and then all of a sudden turn them loose into the world. And so that became part of the conversation about how you operationalize this.
Is there a specific example maybe that comes to mind for you, Patrick, that illustrates when it was that you knew it was time to do something at a district level?
I think last year we heard very loudly from our teachers last year that they were competing with cell phones, and that was just one more. Public education has changed a lot, even outside of cell phones, over the past decade. And so hearing that there was something that we could do to help limit that. Of course, there's also, as we mentioned, legislation going on across the country in other states, and so we're watching that as well. We had a board member, one of our board members, was a strong advocate of this being put into place. And so there were a lot of different pieces that were just coming together that seemed like this was the time that we needed to take an additional step.
Amulya, for you, were cell phones and how they were being used in the classroom, were they affecting what you felt like you were able to get insofar as your education goes?
Sure. I think for me, before this year, having cell phones in the class, I was on my phone, and if we'd have like 10 minutes of work time, I'd think to myself, all right, 10 minutes, that's not enough to really start on this assignment, so I'll just scroll through TikTok for the rest of class and then worry about it when I get home. And now this year, not being allowed to be on my phone, with those 10 minutes, I can get maybe even more than I thought I could get done on the worksheet, and I have the opportunity to go ask my teacher a question about something I might be confused on rather than struggle with it at home. So it's definitely a lot more helpful, or even just socializing with my peers now. We have a lot more people who are on their phone and actually talk to the person next to them instead of just be strangers.
Yeah. Josie, you already mentioned the social aspect of things and actually talking with the people. But Amulya, what do you have described about using even 10 minutes at school instead of browsing TikTok and then having to do the work at home? Is that also something that you have found?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely notice, even just in myself, like I get so much more work done now at school when I'm not focused on my phone and I'm actually focused on what we're doing.
Is there, yeah, Amulya?
It also eliminates the distraction if you know that your peers aren't on Snapchat or sending you things and everybody's not on their phone. It's not like you're missing out. There's no FOMO. It's just get your work done.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Fear of missing out. Just for those who may not know what that is. And, it sounds like people might say, Josie and Amulya, that you are exceptions, that what you're talking about does not necessarily represent what your peers are thinking and feeling. What is it that made you decide that you wanted to be part of creating policy that would not only be applicable to you, but to your fellow students? Josie?
I think a lot of people, I think it's hard coming off of a year where like it's unregulated. It, like you said, it seems like a crackdown to us, but like it could be worse. Like we're not putting our phones in the pouches and stuff, but I think I've noticed that like it really does help people, and that's what made me want to be a part of changing that, because I think taking the phones away really does help get work done and meet new people, too.
In that contract you described that you have with your parents, is there anything that has to do with how you use your time?
Well, in the contract at first, there was time limits that I had set on my phone where I could only spend like 2 hours a day on TikTok or stuff like that, and then it would time out and I would have to actually get done the stuff that I needed to do. And that was in the contract where that wasn't something I could change.
And you are the guinea pig, Amulya, but your younger siblings, in that contract that they have with your parents, are there also similar limits?
Yeah, they saw what went wrong with me and then used that for my younger brother to narrow those guidelines for him.
Okay, that's relatable. I have 2 younger siblings. I was the experiment as well. We need to take a very quick break, but when we come back, we'll continue with this conversation about cell phone policies in schools, who gets to make them, be part of making them, and what the effects have been so far. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
Welcome back. We're spending our entire show today talking about the past, present, and future of cell phones in school classrooms. Districts across our region are implementing their own policies, and lawmakers in Missouri and Illinois aren't far behind. We asked our audience to weigh in on this topic, and we heard from Kathy on Facebook. She wrote, "Screens and face-to-face interaction do not work together. Students' ability to focus has drastically decreased when phone use increases." And we'd like to hear from you too. If you have a question or comment about how cell phones are being used in schools, give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. And now to talk about how one school district is handling this issue, I'm here with Patrick Shelton. He's the superintendent of the Edwardsville School District. And also with us is Josie Proctor, a junior at Edwardsville High School, and Amulya Girada, senior at Edwardsville High School. And I will note that in our break, neither Josie nor Amulya nor Superintendent Shelton were on their phone. So I think that is something of a win. So before the break, we were talking about how students have been involved in what is going on. We talked about teachers. And before we leave that point, this new policy in the Edwardsville School District it just went into effect for this school year. But what was the district's policy, Superintendent, around cell phones up until last year? I mean, was it really just a teacher-to-teacher kind of thing?
So our policy has not really changed. Our policy was exactly the same, but what we didn't have is anything that described how you implemented that policy. And what happens when you do that is it really is up to the individual that's upholding that policy, teachers in a classroom, monitors in a cafeteria, so on and so forth. And that's kind of what we heard that started the conversation, was we heard from teachers, I'm constantly policing in my classroom. And our teachers have so much to do that is one more thing that they don't need to do.
Yeah.
And so we were able to then go back and start having conversations about, so what does that look like? What does it look like from a student behavior standpoint? Is there anything we need to do to change our policy? How do we incorporate those conversations into our student handbook? And then what are we going to do when students don't follow it? Because we know that that's going to happen, especially as you're shifting from one reality to another.
Mm-hmm. Your use of the word policing and the word crackdown, I think there's no accident that they're coming together. Amulya, did you feel like previously that what the teachers were doing was like surveillance or like policing?
I think that students are going to go to college and they're not going to have their professors take their phones away from them when they're not able to focus. So what I've noticed is that my teachers, at least this year, they don't make us put them in a carrier, and they allow us to keep them in our backpacks next to us and control ourselves. But if it does become a problem, that's when they step in. So they let you balance your own phone usage, but if it does become an issue, that's when they step in. And I like that because it's setting you up for college or the future.
It also seems to be a measure of trust that they're putting in you as a student and as a human being, right? Josie, did the previous policy, seem to be working well enough from your point of view?
I don't think that it was strong enough, just because you would have some teachers that would say, no, you can't have your phone out, and then you'd go to your next class and then someone would try to tell you to put it away, but then the student would be like, but my other teacher lets me do this, and it kind of created like a bad guy, good guy kind of thing. Yeah. And so it made it hard to enforce it.
And what was it, Patrick, that teachers were telling you about that about that approach?
Yeah, so one of the things that came up from teachers based on Josie's comment is that they really value the relationship that they have with students, and if they have to constantly be the person that's arguing about what's going on with the cell phone, that damages the relationship between the teacher and the student. And if we could just be very clear as a district on this is what you do and this is what happens when you don't do it, that would be really helpful to teachers in classrooms.
Yeah. We have not yet talked about parents directly. Amulya and Josie, you've talked about your parents. And I believe, Superintendent, you are a parent yourself, right? As we sort of think about what we've talked about so far, when the idea was introduced last year to come up with a district policy, what was it that parents were saying to you?
Well, let's go back before that time, because we have had times where cell phones have been a problem for individual students, and we would try to limit the individual's use of that cell phone. And there were on multiple occasions, we were told by parents, no, I feel like I need to be connected to my child. So it's also, it's the connectivity that happens between a parent and a child, and having that ongoing access just to be able to, text your child and say, what's going on. And so when we put this in, one of the steps that we have is we have a parent-teacher advisory committee that reviews the content of our handbook. And so part of this was taking it to that group of individuals to get feedback. We also have other feedback groups that we work with. One of those is a student advisory group that Josie and Amulya sit on. We were able to get to some student feedback, and it wasn't always warm and fuzzy, but I think when you talk about the why behind limiting access to cell phones and focus and instruction and that being the primary purpose of education, nobody disagrees with that. It's just sometimes disagree on when we have access or what that would look like.
Josie and Amulya, you are on that advisory group. You're part of that group. Was there something that made you decide, like something that you experienced or something that you saw, that made you decide that you wanted to be part of some solution?
I wouldn't say there was like a certain specific situation. I think it was just like an overall thing that like was becoming a problem, like just throughout the school.
How about you, Amulya?
I will say, since we've had our phones taken away, it's actually something that you wouldn't expect. It's caused less kids in the hallway because kids aren't allowed to take their phones with them to the bathroom. And some kids would text to meet up or do laps in the hallway together. And so since you're taking that away, nobody's really in the hall wandering anymore.
Okay. Superintendent Shelton, you mentioned it wasn't always warm and fuzzy. So to the students, what does that mean? What kinds of things were you hearing from your peers? Maybe that they wanted you to understand, or that they wanted you to take to the larger group for discussion? Josie, you're nodding.
I think it was at first like a bad reaction because, like I said, like we're coming off a year where it was like you could have your phone out whenever you wanted. But I think over time people realized like it could be worse. Like there's those pouches that you have to lock, and like I think people are like, well, putting my phone in my backpack when I'm told to is better than checking it in the office every day. And I think everybody kind of realized that, and I think that the trust that we have in the students, and like I think that softens the blow of like completely taking the phone away.
Go ahead.
I also think whenever this policy was implemented, we had new administration, so a lot of the students thought it was something that was coming with the new administration, but it was more something the board had passed, and we'd been wanting to do this. So once kids understood that this is here and it's going to stay, they saw that it was more of a benefit for them than it was hurting them, so they more accepted it than continually fighting back for it.
And there are challenges that we will continue to work through. One of the things we've heard from a lot of our students is that they struggle to get communication from coaches and after-school sponsors because they may not be checking their phone during the day. So if there's a change in a practice time or something that they need to bring, they may not get that information in a timely way like they did before. And so that's something that we continue to work through in terms of network access and can we do something on devices instead of cell phones. And so I think there are still ongoing challenges that we saw benefits from students having access to devices.
I found that really interesting about, I played sports in high school, and this was before cell phone times. There were beepers, and that was something that was kind of a little bit of a problem at a certain point. And I do feel like maybe we are past the point of no return as far as those kind of student activities and the way that people are in touch. But are there alternatives that have been explored such that coaches and students or, like band instructors and students who are participating, that they would not need to rely on devices in order to communicate?
So a great example of that is there's been a request from our students to open up Group Me, which is a group chat that hides cell phone numbers, so you're communicating with a group instead of the individual. And they've asked that we open that up on student devices so that they can have access to that level of communication. All of our coaches and sponsors use some type of communication platform in that way. And so that's something that we're exploring because, again, that's one of the challenges is they may not have access to their cell phone.
Yeah. Can you very briefly tell us, Patrick, what is it that is allowed on the school network and what isn't?
So we have pretty tight filters around anything that is obviously forbidden for an underage student to have access to, so anything alcohol related or beyond. But we also block certain types of searches. We also have certain type of anonymous sites that are blocked because those are pretty common virus sites. We have a set of filters that also right now block instant messaging and group kinds of chats because those aren't just as secure. And so we're pretty tight on our network and trying to figure out a sweet spot there that gives the students what they need, but also protecting the network is a challenge.
Amulya, what is it like to work with adults on this? I mean, do you find that you and Josie and others are doing a lot of educating of the grown-ups?
Yeah, when kids were first mad about it, they were, again, blaming it on the administration. And I think it's just important to have the right information. So me and Josie were explaining that this was a board change and also just taking some of because sometimes when a policy is made, it may not always be the right thing. And so just taking some of that student feedback back to the adults as well as part of it and not just taking the information to the students. So it's kind of like a little cycle and it works. And we've taken, for example, the Group Me and tried to work with that as well.
And I do understand that, Patrick, you meet with the students twice a month so that you are meeting on a regular basis. So the things that you all, Josie and Amulya, that you've also learned from others about why they need cell phones, what is one of the things that you have learned about that? I mean, we've talked about the communication between parents and students about pickups, but something that kind of stood out to me, it has to do with health. Is there something that you've learned about that, Josie?
I think the main thing I've noticed that people say that they would need their phone for is if there was ever an emergency at the school where they would need to message a parent or something like that. And then on the health side, like mental health wise, I think getting off the phone and like actually talking to people, I think helps a lot with that.
I agree. I think on a normal day, if your day goes regular, you're fine. But if, for example, I had an interview at the school and my interview time got changed, and this is the type of interview where you need a suit and everything. So I needed to get signed out so I could go home and get my suit, and I needed my phone to message my mom to sign me out. But if I didn't have that, then I would have taken that interview in my hoodie and sweatpants. So it's just things like that when your day doesn't go the way that you plan to, that you really need your phone.
We're going to take a very quick break here, and when we come back, we will continue this conversation about how schools across our region are enacting bans on how students use cell phones in school. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. We're talking today about schools, cell phones, and new policies that are restricting how students use these devices. This is playing out in many districts, including in the Metro East at the Edwardsville School District. And I'm talking today with the district superintendent, Patrick Shelton, Josie Proctor, who is a junior at Edwardsville High School, and Amulya Girada, who is a senior at Edwardsville High School. Patrick, I'd like to get into sort of what is happening at other schools. Different schools have embraced different policies around cell phones. Some of them require students to put their phones in something called a yonder bag, which can only be opened with a magnet. Was that something that your group considered? And it seems you're not using it. Why did you decide against it?
We're not using anything like that, but we did consider it. And when we first started the conversation, it was really about progressive discipline. So at what point in this process, does a student break that rule enough that they lose the privilege to have their cell phone at all at school? And so we looked at a couple different options. We looked at yonder bags. We looked at cabinets that could be locked up. We talked with teachers about, is that something you want to explore? And I know a lot of our teachers have a specific place within the classroom. They have students put their cell phones, sometimes as a first step and sometimes as a reaction to how they're responding. But we really felt like it was going to be a really small group of students that would get to that point, if at all. And I'm honestly not sure we have students that are in that camp now. I know we do have students who have had cell phones taken away, so we have that progressive policy. But I think once we provided the guardrails for students to operate within, they responded very well to that.
Mm-hmm. And we are talking about what is happening in the region. So on the Missouri side, the policy at Ferguson Florissant that went into effect this year does involve yonder bags and pouches, and they were issued by the district for use this year by the students when they're in school. And those students are required to place all cell phones in that personal locked yonder pouch. We talked a little bit earlier about how much those cost. And you did get a quote, I think.
We did.
Yeah,
we did.
I mean, how much would that have taken from, other places that the money could be spent?
It was twofold. It was a significant cost that would have taken from other places within our budget, but it was also the time factor of we have a school of 2,400 students, and so finding opportunities for those students to be able to lock and unlock pouches as they're coming in, it'd be pretty chaotic at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day.
Yeah. And the policy at FERC it covers devices and not just phones, so things like smartwatches and wireless earbuds. How would your peers have felt about that, Amulya, Josie, having to put those kinds of devices into a pouch?
Me personally, I work very well with music, like doing my math homework or writing up a lab. So initially, not having AirPods in the class was an adjustment, but that's something that I adapted to. And some of my teachers now will play quiet classical music in the background or just some pop hits on the radio. Maybe STLs, who knows? But
oh, yes, STLPR.
They have definitely adapted to it, but even if we had to put it away, I think we would have adjusted to that and gotten used to it.
Yeah.
I definitely think there would have been a lot more of a reaction if it were the bags, because I think that's pretty definite. And like, also, like Amulya mentioned earlier, like whenever you get to college, like you're not going to have that. And so I think that would be like, it's kind of also teaching self-discipline too, to not have it.
Right. So Patrick, what is the policy regarding earbuds and smartwatches?
So we have not addressed earbuds and smartwatches, and we so far haven't really had to. That's been something that's gone by the wayside. I know we've had a couple individual cases of students texting on their watches and things like that, but it's not been very prevalent across key campuses.
Yeah.
I do know for one of my research projects in Lit, we had to look at phone policies at other schools, and one of the other schools has a similar one to us where it's your phone's only allowed to be out during lunch and your passing periods. But another one of the schools, your phone is not allowed to be out at all throughout the day, from when the bell rings to when it ends. And so I think it just depends on what school does what, but I think the students will adjust. They'll have to.
Right. No, students, I mean, usually they don't get to set the consequences for rules that they break. How much of your input went into the policy around, some of the consequences that are connected to cell phones?
I think a lot. It was a lot of like telling us the policy and saying like, what do you think about this? Or like, because like we know our peers best, and I think asking like, how do you think other people would react to this? And that went into a lot of like the process of coming up with the best case scenario for phones.
I will be honest, when they told us at first, mine and Josie's eyes twitched. I mean, we definitely were flabbergasted at the idea, but once they explained it a little more and we realized what it would entail, we were on board.
Because I was thinking like yonder bags and like that kind of stuff, but then once I realized it just put it in your backpack, I mean, that's what I'd been doing for most of my classes anyways.
Yeah. Patrick, in the introduction, we talked about sort of what the first level of consequences and then the fourth level. Can you briefly go through what the different levels are?
Absolutely. So when you have your cell phone out, I think most teachers are giving a gentle reminder. We talked on the way here about the 1 minute bell, and a lot of teachers will say, "Hey, you've got a minute. You need to put your cell phones away. Class is getting ready to start." And then there is a level of teacher discretion that goes in that, right? So every teacher is going to have a little bit of a different push on it. But most teachers have been instructed that they will take that cell phone away if that policy is being violated on the first time, just for the period. And then the next time it's for the day, and they have to pick it up in the office at the end of the day. Third time, it goes to the office, and the parent has to pick it up. And then on the fourth offense, they would lose access to the cell phone for the semester.
And as far as having to go to that level, have you had to confiscate phones so far?
I know there were some at the very beginning of the year for sure. And we also had some students that just said, "No, you're not taking my phone," which then we consider insubordination. We now have gone from a cell phone problem to a different problem.
Okay.
But we have not had a large number of students by any means who have violated that policy. And like I said earlier, I think when you walk through our high school, you don't see a lot of students. We thought passing periods would be like, "Oh, I'm going to pull out my cell phone and I'm going to text everybody I can," and we really don't see a lot of students pulling out their cell phones at passing period. Now, lunch might be a little bit different story because they have more time, but largely it looks like most students are staying off cell phones for the majority of the school day.
Right. In our last couple of minutes, there are bills in both the Illinois and Missouri legislatures that would obligate school districts to create policies that ban cell phones during instructional time. I mean, is this necessary? I mean, you made your own policy. Would those measures at the state level help you in any way sort of continue along the path that you've already started on?
That's always a delicate balance because we always at the school district level, we always like local control because I think every community is a little bit different. Every community has different needs and wants. But at the same time, I think providing guardrails for those schools to operate, and we haven't talked as much about the mental health side, but there's a ton of research about increases in anxiety and depression among teens as it relates to cell phones. And the correlation of cell phones introduction in teens and mental health problems is pretty well documented. And so I think there's a bigger picture here, and we've talked about playing at that level at the state level because we are educating kids from our school district, but we also receive kids from other school districts and send our kids elsewhere. And so having some similarities in the way that you implement those things really helps all of us when we're educating students.
Some consistency, right. Are there ways that you'd like to see things change in the next year, stuff that you've learned over this year that you think would be beneficial next year? Amulya or Josie?
I think I'm really, really, proud of, the policy that we have now because I think it, like we've been talking about, allows a side of trust, but also, it's not, like you said, not an empty promise. If you violate this, we are going to take your phone away. And I think that makes people want to follow it because it's also not there's no trust there at all. We trust you to not get on your phone.
Josie Proctor is a junior at Edwardsville High School. Amulya Girada is a senior at Edwardsville High School. And Patrick Shelton is the superintendent of the Edwardsville School District. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.